Hey guys, what's up? It's Zero9, back with another tutorial. Today we're going to talk about the Haas effect and how to use it correctly. So probably a lot of you already know what the Haas effect is. It's basically a psychoacoustical thing where you can create a kind of big stereo image, and the basic idea is that you are having a specific sound. For example, you have a sound which is mono, so it's pretty much center. And the trick to get it wide is that you're offsetting your signal on the left and the right channel by the specific time. And usually it's between like maybe 5 and 50 milliseconds. And then, so what does it basically mean? Your left channel and your right channel is not playing at the same time anymore. So either one channel or the other is delayed by a few milliseconds. And our brain is very sensitive to changes like this in timing, so that we perceive the sound then coming from two different sources. And then we get the impression that it's a really big stereo field, so it's a really wide sound, but it's actually the exact same sound, just being offset by a few milliseconds. And that's the basic principle behind the Haas effect. So I will just quickly show you an example so that you can hear what it's doing. So I've loaded up a hi-hat loop here, and I've put it in mono just to be sure that it's really mono. All right, and here we can use my stereo effect rack, which is basically a Haas effect. It has two chains, and I have a delay plugin here, and then I'm just here with the utility plugin, putting one signal completely at the left and the other one at the right channel. So I'm panning the signals completely to the right, and this even makes the effect even more apparent and the stereo field even bigger. But the kind of Haas effect here is the delay plugin, and can control the width basically with this delay up here. And depending on the delay settings, as higher as you go, it sounds even wider, but you have to be careful because the Haas effect has some downsides, and we will check it out in a minute. But let's just give you an example how it sounds like. So yeah, I think it's obvious what it's doing. It's kind of delaying one channel and offsetting it by a few milliseconds, and then you get the impression that you have like really two sounds playing on left and right, and that gets you the impression of a very big stereo field. And it's a very cool effect, but you have to be careful. And I will just quickly show you what's the problem or what's the downside of the Haas effect. Let's just put it at 30 milliseconds again, and I will play the signal here with the Haas effect on, and then afterwards I will mono it, and then you will quickly hear what's the problem with the Haas effect. And there you can really hear it. The problem with the Haas effect is that since it's delaying one channel, if you then put it back in mono, you have kind of like two hi-hats quickly coming after each other, like a instead of because you have like two transients, and then it's really like smears the transients. And if you have a high delay setting like I have right now with 30 milliseconds, you can even hear the two transients after each other, and that really you already heard it makes the sound a lot worse. And this is the main problem with the Haas effect. And this problem is really obvious, especially with transient heavy materials, where if you're like drums, hi-hats, for example, or like very punchy synths, and you're using the Haas effect on them, you will get kind of problems if you put him back in mono. And since we're making like heavy dance music and music is meant to be played in clubs, still a lot of club systems are in mono. So we have to take care of that. And I will just show you a way now to get it kind of white, but still have a like okay sound in mono. So in general, I would advise or would recommend to use the Haas effect more on elements which are not like extremely important to be very present in mono. For example, let's say you have some pad sounds which are just there for giving it some atmosphere. There it's often not a big problem if they are getting quieter in mono. But you have like a real an element, a very important element, one of your main elements, like a open hi-hat or a big synth sound. You have to really check that it's still there and present in mono, and not getting lost in the mix. And the trick is to use the right delay setting for the offset. So it really makes a difference if you're using like 5, 10 or 30 milliseconds. And the easiest way to check how it sounds still acceptable or good in mono is to enable the Haas effect, and then afterwards monoing it again to see how it sounds in mono, then adjust the delay time and find the setting where it sounds still good in mono. And then, because the Haas effect will always sound wide, even if it's just 5 or 10 milliseconds, it's still wide. So the stereo field is not big of a problem. It will always sound good, but you have to find the right setting where it sounds good in mono, because then you know, okay, it's still wide, but if you're playing the track at a club, which is which has a sound system which is mono, the track still sounds good. And I quickly will show you how to do that with the rack here in with the hi-hat loop. And I will just play it and adjust the delay time, and then you can hear how it changes in mono, and then we try to find a setting where it still sounds good, or at least acceptable. You have to just remember that you will always use lose some quality in mono or some of the sounds, because you're just offsetting it and it will get some problems. So it's always you have advantages and disadvantages, and one advantage is that you have a big stereo field, but in return you get a little bit worse sounding in mono. So you have to just find the right balance where you say, okay, it's acceptable in mono, but in return I get a very big stereo field. So let's just try it out. So here at the very low settings, you can really hear that it gets in this kind of phasey area where you really can hear the phasing between the different signals. So that's too low already. But if we go to somewhere around 10 milliseconds, I think we can get it a little bit better. So just also compensate for the volume, because otherwise it's we get tricked a little bit. So you can hear it's a little bit problematic because in all settings, like you kind of lose something because it will smear the transient a little bit. So you have to decide which sounds the best to you. I think around like 7 or 8 milliseconds, you still hear a little bit of phasing. So yeah, it's not perfect, but you have to find the setting which sounds the best to you, then just go for it. Let's just quickly see how it sounds in stereo. So you can see, you can hear it's really wide, even if you're using just 7 milliseconds, and it's more than enough. And in mono, yeah. We lose the transient, of course, yeah, and that's because just of the thing, how the Haas effect works, and you have to take care of that. So my recommendation is, with really transient heavy stuff, it's not that good of an idea. But if you have like a little bit different sound, for example, if you have more like a shaker sound, where it doesn't have a lot of very high and sharp transients, we can just quickly test this and just look up the shaper box here and reduce the transient a little bit, and see if then it's a little bit better. So let's say we have something like this, which is like more like a shaker sound, and then we use the stereo effect. You can hear that it's not as worse as with the original hi-hat sample, where it's really like a sharp transient. So in general, I would recommend you to use it for like more sustained sound with less transient, but you can still sometimes on like hi-hat sounds, closed hi-hat, shaker sounds, you can still get it in an area where it's okay and have it really big. But let's just play with some different sounds. Let's see what we have here. I have a downlifter sound, for example, an FX sound, and on stuff like this, it often works very well. So let's just quickly test it. Slow it down a bit. And here you can hear that it's not that dramatic. We still have kind of the same sound, and not like getting these heavy phase issues, or like phasing sounds with the hi-hat in before. So on stuff like this, it works pretty well. For example, also white noise risers or white noise downlifters. It often works pretty well without losing too much of the original sound. And you can play around with the delay here as well. Here you can hear it a little bit more on the, if you really listen to the transient, that you have like a right after. You have like two transients of the symbol here. With a lower setting, it's a little less obvious. And you can hear it. It gets really wide here with the setting. So in this case, the Haas effect would be a good idea to make if you want to make it really wide, and it still has a kind of okay sound in mono. And let's check the last example, which is a kind of like a pad sound or atmospheric background sound. And here it might work very well as well, because we have a like more sustained sound, no transients. Let's just quickly test it. So you can hear there's not a big difference between the processed sound and the original sound. So for like stuff like this, pads, white noise risers, very sustained sounds, the Haas effect often works really well, and you don't lose a lot of details in mono. But always just remember, if you're using the Haas effect, always test it how it sounds in mono, and just put a utility plugin afterwards and quickly put it in mono and see, okay, do I lose a lot of this original sound in mono? And then you have to adjust the delay time. A lot of times you can find a setting where it's still okay, but sometimes it just doesn't work, especially with like very sharp transients. And then you have to think about, maybe you have to use different techniques like panning and duplicating the channels and adjusting them a little bit differently, or you use stuff like chorus or ping pong delay, or just other techniques to make it wide, because on some sounds the Haas effect is just not like the best way to make it wide. But for like sustained sounds and effect sounds, it often works pretty well. So I hope it was helpful. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments, or if you have any recommendations for future videos, just let me know. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video. Ciao, bye bye.